Last Sunday, the world was surprised by an unprecedented attack by the Houthis, the rebel youth group against Israel. For the first time, one of the ballistic missiles launched by the Houthis successfully reached a target of great relevance: Tel Aviv's main international airport. This attack not only drew attention for accuracy and audacity, but also generated serious impacts on international air transport. Several airlines, in the face of the threat, temporarily suspended their flights to Israel, which significantly affected the region's air connectivity. In addition, the attack left at least 6 injured, which increased the tension in both Israel and in the international powers that closely follow the escalation of the conflict. This attack was not an isolated event. Since the beginning of the war triggered by Hamas against Israel in October 2023, the Houthis has intensified their actions against the country. They claim solidarity with Palestine, especially in relation to events in Gaza, and have shown support in various ways, including the use of missiles and drones. The attack on Tel Aviv airport was only a reflection of this climb of aggression, which now involves a combination of air attacks and also an attempt to block the main navigation routes in the Red Sea. The Houthis are not just attacking Israeli targets. Since the beginning of their offensive, they have also attacked civil and military vessels in an effort to block traffic in the Red Sea, affecting international trade routes, many of which have no direct connection with Israel. The goal of the group seems to be to isolate Israel, affecting their economies and supply lines, and creating an instability zone in the region. Meanwhile, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu was pressured to react. On May 5th, after the attack on airports, Israel responded with an aerial mission involving about 20 fighters, which launched about 50 bombs on strategic targets located in the city of Hodeidah, Yemen. These attacks have aimed at the Houthis' infrastructure in a clear effort to dismantle their operational and logistics abilities. The Hodeidah port was one of the main targets, being described as a crucial logistics center for the Houthis, where weapons and equipment are received, many of them from Iran. In addition, an important target was a cement factory located in the Baghal region, which, according to Israel information, was used by the Houthis for the construction of tunnels and other military structures. For Israel, the destruction of the Hodeidah port has a direct impact on the Houthis' ability to continue the offensive in the Red Sea and against Israeli territory. Porto is considered one of the main sources of revenue for the group, as well as being one of the gun and fuel supply doors from Iran. These Israeli airstrikes represent not only retaliation, but an attempt to cut vital logistics features that support Houthis' struggle against Israel. After these bombings, the Houthis did not hesitate to answer. Already on May 6th, the group's leaders promised to retaliate. The focus now is to continue attacking Israeli airports, especially Ben Gurion Airport, one of the main entry points for the country, and pressing international airlines to reconsider their routes to Israel. They know that a continuous offensive can further destabilize the security situation in the country, forcing the international community to rethink their support to Israel. These attacks, both Israel and Houthis' side, reflect a much more complex strategy, with Iran, as always, being a central figure behind the scenes. The relationship between the Houthis and Iran has been pointed out by several analysts as a determining factor for the escalation of the conflict. Israel, like the United States, has clearly identified Iran as the great mentor behind Houthis' actions, providing funding, logistical support, and, most importantly, weapons. However, while Iran continues to deny direct involvement, admitting only moral support, reality on the battlefield says something else. The fact that Iran is directly associated with the Houthi cause is no longer in debate, and the Israeli government through Netanyahu has been emphatic in stating that the Houthis act under Tehran's direct guidance. However, a crucial question stands in this scenario. Why is Israel, instead of directly confronting Iran, has focused on the attacks on Yemen? What is behind this Israeli strategy is a much more pragmatic and strategic response, which involves several military and political considerations. Let's understand this deeper into the next block, where we will explore the complexity of this decision, the risks involved, and the possible consequences of a direct climbing against Iran. Israel's choice to attack the Houthis' positions in Yemen, instead of directly confronting Iran, may seem contrary at first glance. After all, Iran is widely considered the true commander behind the Houthi movement. So why not directly attack the Iranian regime, which is seen as the main threat to Israel? The answer lies in a series of strategic and geopolitical considerations that involve huge risks to Israel. First, attacking Iran directly would mean opening a new war front. This would not only risk the safety of Israeli territory, but would also affect their military and political alliances with Western powers and other allies in the Middle East. Iran has a considerable military power, and its strengths are much better positioned to resist a direct attack. The confrontation with Iran would also mean a large-scale regional conflict, something Israel wants to avoid at all costs due to the repercussions that would bring, both in the military and economic field. Also, Iran is not just supporting the Houthis. He also has ties with Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and with several other militant groups in the region. A direct attack on Iran could trigger a series of retaliation of these allied groups, spreading the conflict throughout the region. The human and military cost would be catastrophic not only for Israel, but for the entire international community that is interested in maintaining stability in the Middle East. Instead, Israel has opted for a more indirect method of facing Iran, weakening its regional allies, such as the Houthis, and prevents the Iranian regime from expanding its military and political influence in the Middle East. By attacking the Houthis, Israel is not only destabilizing one of Iran's main military arms, but also hindering its weapons supply routes and other resources. Hodeidah, with its strategic port, is a key point for Iran to send armaments to the Houthis, and by destroying it, Israel aims to cut these supply lines without directly facing Iran. In addition, Israel's choice to attack Yemen and Houthis reflects an impact limitation strategy. Yemen is a country in civil war, where international and local forces are deeply involved. This gives Israel a larger maneuver margin to attack targets that are important to the Houthis without an immediate and massive response of global powers. Unlike a direct attack on Tehran, which could trigger a global response, the destruction of Yemen facilities is more easily justified as a legitimate action of defense, and is less likely to cause a significant international reaction. The role of the United States is also fundamental in this context. The US, like Israel, has great interest in preventing Iran from increasing its influence on the Middle East. This is clear in the parallel actions that the US has taken against the Houthis. Since March 2023, the US has performed a series of air bombing and air attacks against Houthis positions in Yemen, in response to attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. Although the US and Israel are acting coordinated, both have avoided directly confronting Iran, preferring to attack its proxies on the ground, which offers a relatively lower risk solution. Still, the fact that Israel attacks the Houthis and their allies in Yemen can be interpreted in many ways. For many analysts, the measure is seen as a way to weaken the Houthis and reduce Iran's ability to use the group as a proxy in their indirect war against Israel. However, there are those who argue that this may be a form of Israel to try to limit the threat in the Red Sea without getting involved in an open confrontation with Iran, which would have unpredictable and long-range consequences. Conflict in the Red Sea and attacks on Houthis also have a significant economic dimension. The Red Sea is one of the most important trade routes in the world, with billions of dollars in goods being transported by it each year. Blocking commercial routes and increased insecurity at this point of passage would affect not only Israel, but many other global economies. Therefore, from preventing the Houthis from dominating the Red Sea is a priority not only for Israel, but also for Western powers that are interested in the region's economic and geopolitical stability. However, even with these attacks and their rhetoric, the Houthis do not seem willing to retreat. They continue to say that they will intensify attacks against Israel and their commercial routes, taking advantage of the current vulnerability of Israel and the fragility of global defenses in the Red Sea. For them, the war against Israel is both an ideological and strategic issue, and they are not limited to retaliation for their own attacks. For the Houthis, this offensive against Israel is part of a greater struggle for hegemony in the region and against what they perceive as an imperialist presence in the Middle East. In short, what we have here is an indirect and nuanced war, where Israel tries to counteract Iran's allies without provoking direct confrontation with Tehran. The big question is, will this strategy actually limit the Iranian threat, or will it only extend the conflict? Time will say whether this more cautious approach will be effective or if Israel will eventually need to climb the war more directly to ensure its safety. The situation in the Middle East, particularly regarding the conflict between Israel, the Houthis, and Iran, continues to be complicated as different international players try to shape the future of the region. Israel's strategy of attacking Houthis facilities in Yemen can be seen as an attempt to destabilize Iran's weapon supply lines, but also raises issues about the long-term effectiveness of these actions. Although it is a way of limiting the Iranian threat indirectly, this approach seems to have temporary results. By attacking strategic targets in Yemen, such as ports and airports, Israel aims to cut Iran's ability to arm its allies and make it difficult for Houthis to access vital resources. However, as Houthis have shown in their attacks to Israel and other international targets, they are far from being defeated and continues with their blockage and retaliation agenda. The conflict, therefore, has the potential to intensify further, as the Houthi and Iran group continue to see their actions as a vital part of their resistance strategy against Israel and their allies. In addition, the presence of external forces such as the United States further complicates the dynamics of conflict. While Israel and the US seem to be in tune in their approaches to attack the Houthis and prevent Iran's advancement, the impacts of these operations can be unpredictable. The retaliations of the Houthis, for example, can lead to more air attacks against Israeli targets and also against Western forces in the region, affecting commercial and military interests from various nations. The Red Sea issue also remains crucial. As one of the most important navigation routes in the world, any significant disturbance in this region affects not only Israel and Yemen, but also global trade. Blocking these routes may undermine economies around the world by interrupting oil transport and essential goods. This scenario can result in international economic and political tensions, especially between powers that depend on free access to the Red Sea, the strategic impasse and the alternatives to Israel. While Israel continues to bombard targets in Yemen, the international community remains divided over the best approach to dealing with Iran and its allies in the Middle East. The implications of a direct conflict with Iran are vast, with economic, political, and military consequences that could affect all the stability of the Middle East and beyond. Israel's alternative to focus on its actions in Yemen reflects the attempt to avoid a large-scale war, but also raises questions about the effectiveness of this long-term strategy. Some analysts suggest that Israel may be avoiding direct confrontation with Iran for a number of practical and strategic reasons, including the fear of uncontrolled climbing. However, the fact that Houthis continues to attack Israel and their strengths may be a sign that the strategy adopted by Israel is not having the desired effects. For Israel, an open war with Iran would be a risky option, not only due to the military power of the Iranian regime, but also for possible repercussions on its international relations and the impact on defense alliances. The situation in Gaza and borders with Lebanon and Syria also adds another layer of complexity to the scenario. Israel is already involved in a prolonged war in Gaza, with new military operations being planned for the temporary occupation of the territory. This further overwhelms the resources and operational capacity of Israeli forces, making it more difficult for the country to get involved in a new war with Iran at this time. Thus, Israel's strategy of focusing on her attacks on the Houthis seems to be a way of trying to limit the Iranian threat without further overwhelming their strengths and opening a new war front. The role of Iran, hidden influence and public negation. Although Iran is widely accused of funding, arming, and guiding the Houthis, the Iranian regime continues to deny its direct involvement in the conflict. However, the evidence points to substantial material support from Iran to Houthis, which includes the provision of advanced weapons, military training, and logistical support. The role of Iran as a strategic mentor behind the Houthis is a point of discord in the international community, with many analysts claiming that the Tehran regime uses Houthis as a proxy to destabilize the region and attack Western and Israeli interests. Despite the evidence, Iran maintains a negation stance, claiming that support for the Houthi movement is only moral and ideological, without direct military involvement. This creates a complicated diplomatic situation, as Iran's direct involvement in the conflict could be interpreted as an act of war against Israel and its allies, something Tehran wants to avoid. Iran's strategy, therefore, has been to keep Houthis as an independent military force, although under their indirect guidance, to continue their activities against Israel and their operations in the Red Sea. Conclusion: an indirect conflict with global repercussions. The conflict in Yemen, which involves Israel, the Houthis, and Iran, is an example of how the great military and regional powers are involved in an indirect war, where direct combat is avoided in favor of wear and containment strategies. Israel, by attacking the key of the Houthis, seeks to weaken Iranian support without provoking a large-scale war. However, the result of this strategy remains uncertain, with the risk of ever-present climbing. The situation in the Middle East remains unstable, with the continuous attacks and retaliation of the Houthis, while the international community carefully observes developments, knowing that any significant change could affect global security and political balance in the Middle East. This scenario demonstrates the complexity of international relations and how a country's actions can have global repercussions in such a volatile region. The conflict is still far from resolved, and the future of the Middle East depends on the strategic decisions that will be made in the coming weeks and months. The current situation shows a growing complexity and a scenario of uncertainty in the Middle East, with indirect war, cross-attacks, and regional tensions at an increasing level. Israel, by attacking the Houthis, is trying to contain Iran's advance without opening a new war front. However, the risk of climbing is still present, and the future of the region depends on strategic decisions that may have global repercussions. The balance between aggression and diplomacy will be the key to the course of the next chapters of this crisis.